in a nutshell about literature with Joseph Pearcem.
Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am Franczak and this is part 33 of In a Nutshell about Literature with Joseph Pearcem. In the previous episode, Joseph answered an interesting question from one of our viewers about the connection between Greek tragedy and modern politics. And today we are going to start a new conversation about one of Shakespeare's most popular plays, Romeo and Juliet, a play that everyone thinks is about romantic love at first sight. But is it really? Okay, so we've actually started talking about ancient tragedy and the topic of theater. We have already talked about one of the most important Shakespeare's plays, The Merchant of Venice, which is also probably one of the most misinterpreted plays by Shakespeare. But there is another play which has been extremely popular and probably been read and reread and interpreted on stage innumerable times. Here I have a popular edition, Romeo and Juliet. And this is a play about romantic love at first sight. And unfortunately, the two lovers are not lucky enough to live happily forever and ever because there is, as we know, a family feud, and unfortunately, everything ends tragically. Is this the correct summary of this play?
No, I've written a book called Shakespeare and Love, which look just on Romeo and Juliet. I can't remember what the subtitle is now. Oh, there we are. So I can read the subtitle from it. Seeing the Catholic Presence in Romeo and Juliet, the subtitle. So yes, that's what you've just enunciated and summarized is what I call the romantic reading of Romeo and Juliet. Now, first thing we should say is that romanticism as a movement was still 200 years in the future. So Shakespeare would certainly not look at reality from the lens of romanticism because it had not even happened yet. So that's the first thing we need to be bearing in mind, is to try to project upon a work philosophies that would have been unknown to the author is clearly a way of imposing ourselves on the integrity of the work itself. But of course, romantic love in the sense of passion and eros, and allowing our erotic desires to overpower our reason is something that's been around since the earliest times. We see it in the Aeneid with the relationship between Dido and Aeneas. So Shakespeare's obviously very aware of that. And in fact, Shakespeare's approach in Romeo and Juliet is exactly the same as Virgil's, that this allowing our passionate erotic desire to override our rational understanding of reality and of virtue is destructive to the partners concerned, but also beyond that to other people.
Right. So I propose that we start actually from the beginning. I was to mention your book that you were first to mention. So you wrote the whole book dedicated to this popular and great play, but unfortunately it seems misinterpreted the same as The Merchant of Venice, which is a surprise. And you also are the editor. Unfortunately, I have it in electronic form of the Ignatius Press edition, which I recommend, by the way. I think I will put here an image of that edition because that is a well-edited, yes, exactly, a well-edited edition of publication of this a great play, and there are some critical essays. So I think the potential readers can learn a lot. And let's start from the beginning. In your book, we know that Shakespeare drew his inspiration from works of different authors, yes, and it seems something that was typical at his time. And writing about Romeo and Juliet, you mentioned something that you called a process of creative revisionism, and which, in your opinion, seems a part of Shakespeare's inspirational motivation in selecting a theme upon which to write. What does it exactly mean? Let's explain it to the reader, because I think it is important to understand also Romeo and Juliet and some other plays by Shakespeare.
Yeah, so generally speaking, Shakespeare did not invent plots from scratch. He took pre-existing plots, pre-existing stories, and then did things with them. So what's very interesting is to see what he does with them, because that gives us some sort of insight as to what his motives are. Because if he changes the source, how is he changing it, and for what purpose and for what reason? So that allows us actually to get a very valuable insight into Shakespeare's own psyche, his own beliefs, his own motivations, intentions. So looking at the original source and then seeing how Shakespeare does things to it in a certain direction, in a certain way, allows us to understand Shakespeare very well. So it's actually a very good way of getting the insight into the author of the plays to see how he is motivated, and often actually not just motivated, but provoked by an earlier work in order to do things with it, to represent it in a way which he believes is more reflective of reality.
Okay, but what was Shakespeare's idea changing that original text? How did he change? Because this is important in here.
Well, there's more than one source, but the main source probably that Shakespeare used for Romeo and Juliet is an earlier poem by Arthur Brooke called The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet. Published about, it's a poem, a narrative poem, published about 20 years earlier. Now, two things very spring out of this immediately from Brooke's original that Shakespeare changes. One is the anti-Catholicism of the original poem. In the original poem, that the villain of the piece is Friar Lawrence. He's the person basically that's apart from the feud, he's the person whose manipulative approach to things in a papist way, is the problem. And Shakespeare, of course, makes of Friar Lawrence a problematic character, a weak character, but the judgment ultimately of the prince at the end is that we still have known thee as a holy man. In other words, that even when he makes mistakes, his motives are holy. If he has a weakness, there's an element of cowardice to him. So he's a human person, but he's also, we still have known thee for a holy man. So Shakespeare changes this villain into actually the person who, almost the only person in the play, enunciates any wisdom at all. Everybody else in the play, for the most part, and Mercutio and Benvolio sometimes have little snippets, but for the most part, the wisdom in the play comes from the Franciscan friar. So that's the first thing. Shakespeare corrects the anti-Catholic bias in the original. The other thing that's very interesting is he makes Juliet younger, considerably younger, in his play than she is in the source. I think in the source she's 16. Shakespeare makes her still 13, not quite 14. She's 13 years old, so 3 years younger. We don't know in Arthur Brooke's poem Romeo and Juliet. Romeo's 18. Shakespeare doesn't give us Romeo's age, but he's old enough to banter cynically with Mercutio about love. He's old enough to try to seduce Rosalind Rosaline with I'm reading As You Like It at the moment, so forgive me. that he's old enough to actually try to seduce her, including offering her money in order to open her lap to him. So he's not a kid, right? And in addition, he's enough of a man to defeat the fearsome Tybalt that everyone else is scared of in a sword fight, right? So he's clearly not a kid. Now, how old is he? We're not told, but he can't be younger than 18, shall we say, right? From all the evidence. And Juliet's 13. So all of a sudden, first of all, the erotic dynamic changes drastically when you've got a man basically seducing a child. And then, of course, you've got the fact that Shakespeare makes his play pro-Catholic and not anti-Catholic.
About the age of Juliet, I will want to talk about it a little bit more, but this is an important thing in the play to point out. But of course, like if we talk about Shakespeare's plays, he did the same thing you suggest in some other plays. He changed the meaning to make them pro-Catholic and not anti-Catholic. Yes. And we can see it actually in The Merchant of Venice too, and in Hamlet. I think we can trace this Catholic feature. Not mentioning that in many Shakespeare's plays there are Catholic priests, right? And they are positive characters mainly, right?
Yeah, and normally it's actually intriguing and interesting that they're often and usually Franciscans. Now, of course, what they could not be in Shakespeare's time was Jesuits. There's actually, that would guarantee getting put in prison, if not worse. So there could be Jesuits, but even the Dominicans, because of their role in the Inquisition and that sort of should we say they would be seen in England as aggressively Catholic, whereas Shakespeare, if you like, hides behind the romantic figure of St. Francis of Assisi, that even though people are no longer papists, they can't sort of help but like St. Francis because of who he is. So the Franciscans are the safest within the environment of the Catholic, the anti-Catholic persecution in which Shakespeare's culture is rife, the safest Catholic presence. And of course, by setting it in the past, setting a place in the past or in Italy, then obviously they're going to be Catholic priests, but rather than having a priest, which is illegal in England, right, or certainly not a Jesuit or a Dominican, he has a Franciscan friar, which is it's much more acceptable. I mean, I can still imagine that the Puritans hated the theatre, but that the Anglicans not liking the fact, but nonetheless, that's the way he got away with it.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for watching. If you haven't seen the previous episodes yet, please check out the In a Nutshell About Literature playlist. You can watch them individually or as 5 longer compilation videos. And please remember, you can support the development of this channel in several ways. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet, like this video and leave a comment. Share the video by copying the link and posting it on other social media. And finally, support us financially by buying me a virtual cup of coffee or making a donation. Please check the options below the video where you will find links to 2 services, Buy Coffee 2 and Zrzutka. Thank you once again and see you in the next episodes of In a Nutshell About Literature with Joseph Pearcem. God bless you.